Have you ever wondered what it would take to just start over, to build a better world from the ground up? Well, today, we're diving into a massive collection of documents that claims to be exactly that. I'm not talking about some philosophical treatise. This is a detailed architectural blueprint for a new civilization.
So let's just sit with that for a second. What if you had a step-by-step manual? Not just vague ideas, but the engineering specs, the ethical codes, the economic models, the whole shebang. It sounds like something straight out of science fiction, right? But the blueprint we're about to unpack is so incredibly detailed, it's honestly kind of mind-blowing. All right, so where do you even start with something this big? Well, the blueprint unfolds in layers, kind of like a fractal. And to get the whole picture, we have to start with the smallest, most fundamental piece, the individual. Or, as this system calls it, the sovereign digital self. Now, this very digital journey actually begins with something surprisingly physical, the Aura capsule. Yeah, it's a high-tech, medical-grade hyperbaric pod, but get this, it's made from pure quartz sand from a specific place, Minjerribah in Australia. This is not just a random detail. The blueprint calls this geopoetic alchemy, this whole idea of embedding ancient, meaningful materials right into our most futuristic technology. So what happens when you get inside one of these things? You go through what's called a 60-session Genesis protocol. For the first 20 sessions, the pod sensors are just learning about you, mapping your unique biological quirks and responses. Then an AI takes all that data and designs personalized sensory experiences. Think light, sound, temperature, all to boost your well-being. But this final phase is where it gets really wild. It's designed to literally measure and even train your ability to consciously influence your own biology. We're talking mind over matter, quantified. And the final result of all this, your digital twin. Let's be really clear here. This is not just another social media profile. This is meant to be a living, dynamic digital reflection of you, integrating your biology, your memories, your skills. And here is the absolute most important part of this entire system. You own it. 100%. The data is yours. You and you alone control the keys. So how do you actually interact with this twin? Well, it's not pre-programmed. The relationship evolves over time based on how you use it. It could become something like the Guardian, a really proactive co-pilot that helps you navigate life. Or it might become the Oracle, more of a passive knowledge bank that just serves as your perfect memory. It adapts to you, not the other way around. Okay, I know what you're thinking. This is where things could get really dystopian really fast. And the designers knew that, so they built in 3 non-negotiable ethical rules. First, clothing, not skin, which means no implants, no neural links. Your twin is an external partner, not a forced merger with your body. Second, sovereignty through severability. You must always have the ability to just unplug, no questions asked. And finally, data with dignity, which we already mentioned. Your data is always yours, period. These aren't just suggestions. They're hard-coded into the system's DNA. Okay, so we've got these empowered, sovereign individuals with their digital twins. But a person isn't a society, right? What happens when they all start interacting? What kind of economy do they build? Well, that brings us to layer 2. Their answer is something called the braided economy. And what I find so fascinating about this is that it doesn't try to tear down our current system. Not at all. Instead, it weaves a completely new one right alongside it, creating this hybrid model that bridges 2 totally different ways of thinking about what has value. So on one side of the braid, you have the financial economy we all know. It's for business, products, services, all measured in dollars or whatever your local currency is. But braided right into it is the reciprocity economy. And this is the radical part. It's an entire system designed to finally put a real value on all the essential work our current market just completely ignores. We're talking about caregiving, mentoring, volunteering, taking care of local ecosystems, all the invisible labor that actually holds our communities together. So how do you measure that kind of value? You'd think it'd be complicated, but the answer is incredibly simple. 1 hour of your time. They call it a community hour. 1 hour of your verified contribution to the community's well-being equals 1 unit of value. That's it. And it's all tracked on a transparent ledger. Its value isn't based on market speculation. It's grounded in the most real thing we all have, our time. Okay, individual, check. Community economy, check. But how do you actually scale something like this? How do you go from a few pods made of special sand in one little corner of the world to a functioning global network? Well, that is layer 3. The whole scaling strategy starts exactly where the sand for the pods came from, Minjerribah, Australia. The island is designated as the living laboratory. This isn't some computer simulation. It's where they plan to test everything in the real world, from actually manufacturing the pods locally, to rolling out the braided economy, to seeing if the community governance models actually work with real people. This is where the rubber meets the road. From that living lab, the plan is to scale out using a pretty unique venture capital model called Queen's VC, which, as the name suggests, specifically focuses on funding women-led ventures. You can see the phases laid out here. Phase 1 is the proof of concept in Australia. Phase 2 is all about replication across the G20 nations. And Phase 3, that's the end game, a planetary grid of tens of thousands of these interconnected ventures. And this chart really just puts the raw ambition into perspective. Look at that jump. The growth isn't meant to be slow and steady. It's exponential. The whole strategy is designed to go from a local experiment to a global force in just 3 big moves. They are thinking about massive scale from day one. So we've got the what and we've got the how. But that leaves the biggest, most important question of all. Why? Why on earth go to all this incredible, complicated trouble? For that, we have to peel back the final layer of this blueprint and look at the ultimate motivation, what the documents call the Protopian Gambit. The answer to why begins with a pretty stark and frankly alarming assessment of our world today. The blueprint argues that we're in a state of what it calls polycrisis. It's not just one problem or one conflict in one place. As their own analysis in this table from the document shows, the claim is that major conflicts are kicking off all at once across the entire globe, creating this profound planet-wide instability. And here is where the blueprint's logic takes a really fascinating turn. It argues that this geopolitical tension isn't happening in a vacuum. It claims these human conflicts are being amplified by a convergence of major physical events happening to our planet and in our solar system, an unusually strong solar cycle, a rare passing of multiple comets, and a major weird atmospheric event over Antarctica. The argument is that all these things combined are putting this immense, unseen pressure on all of us. All of this, the human conflict, the solar storms, the comets, is framed within this grand, almost mythic cosmic story. And this quote from the document really gets to the heart of it. The blueprint's creators are operating from a fringe scientific theory of a 12,000-year solar cycle that basically acts as a civilizational catalyst, like a planetary reset button. Now look, whether you believe that theory is kind of beside the point. For the people who built this project, that is the ticking clock. That is the ultimate high-stakes motivation for everything we've just looked at. So if you believe the world is facing a crisis of this magnitude, what do you do? Well, this entire system, the Aura capsules, the digital twins, the braided economy, this is their proposed answer. It's not a prediction of a doomed future. It's designed to be a proactive tool, a kind of choose-your-own-adventure framework for building a more resilient, a more regenerative civilization, designed specifically for this moment of intense global challenge. And that brings us to the end of our tour, and it leaves us with one heck of a question to chew on. We've seen the hardware, the digital souls, the new economy, and the cosmic backstory. So, is this a serious, practical engineering blueprint for our collective future? Or is it the most complex, most high-stakes game ever designed? You know, the more you look at it, the answer might just be both.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Okay, today we're tackling something. Well, it's massive. A blueprint that genuinely spans from your own personal consciousness, like the microscopic level,
All the way out.
all the way out to the cosmic. We're talking about nothing less than a global macro plan for civilization. It sounds wildly ambitious, maybe even complex.
Definitely complex.
But the sources we've got are just shockingly detailed. They lay out this whole integrated system. Starts with your sovereign self, and somehow ends up at galactic climate resilience.
Yeah, and that's the core tension, isn't it? We're really examining the architecture of this aura of intelligence, they call it AOI, this whole ecosystem. It's a vision, a framework that tries to blend, cutting-edge decentralized systems with a really different economic model, regenerative economics, plus advanced AI development, and this high-stakes cosmological narrative woven through it all.
And the mission they state is huge, too. It's about de-risking the future of humanity.
Yeah.
Achieving what the creators call joyful, responsible abundance.
That's the phrase, joyful, responsible abundance.
Now, our listener, who's apparently been deep in this vision for over a decade, and it sounds like development has really ramped up since, the whole large language model explosion.
ChatGPT moment. Yeah.
Right. So they shared hundreds of sources, and they were really clear. This is designed to communicate possibility. It's not presented as complete or finished.
That's a key distinction. It's an architectural possibility.
And the whole framework seems engineered on this assumption that LLMs, especially using things like spec-driven development models, they allow this huge amount of complex research, architectural planning.
To actually become code.
Yeah, to be transferred into operating self-healing code, and maybe, potentially, even by just one person, working from like a shed in a small fishing village on an island in Australia. Amity, North Stradbroke Island, apparently.
Wow. Well, the scale of the vision kind of makes more sense when you think about what AI can do now, synthesizing and executing really complex, disparate tasks. It makes that single-person developer idea less impossible, maybe?
Maybe. So we're exploring this possibility of a choose-your-own protopian future, guided by these incredibly detailed plans. And it starts really small, doesn't it? With the individual, your ethical relationship with your own data, your health.
And then it fractally builds out. From the individual to the community to the planet and maybe beyond.
Okay, let's unpack this massive vision. We have to start at the beginning, right? The foundation, the individual. Where does this physical journey of self-sovereignty actually begin?
It starts with a piece of hardware,
Yep.
something very specific, meticulously engineered, the Aura capsule. They also call it the geode.
The geode.
And then it's described in the sources almost like a cosmic egg. It's deliberately positioned as this therapeutic vessel for regenerative health, yes, but also the physical home where you actually create your digital twin.
So it's blending personal wellness with some pretty deep tech architecture right from the start.
Exactly.
I thought the material science bit was fascinating. It's not just, some standard fiberglass pod or metal chamber. The shell is described as a pressure-rated geopolymer composite.
Right. Strong stuff.
But what really jumped out was the inclusion of 99% pure crystalline quartz sand. And it's sourced very specifically from Minjerribah, North Stradbroke Island in Australia, which is also the designated minimum HQ location mentioned earlier. That feels incredibly intentional, linking this hard tech blueprint to a specific place, almost a mythic place.
Oh, it's absolutely intentional. And it seems designed to tackle one of the big criticisms of high-tech wellness.
Yeah.
The idea that it's all just placebo or,
Ooh,
exactly,
got it.
that it's just woo-woo. The architects actually call this specific approach geopoetic alchemy. It's a strategic choice.
geopoetic alchemy. Okay.
They're claiming the quartz isn't just symbolic. They're actually asserting that the material composition itself acts as a kind of resonant frequency guide. So, by embedding the unique crystal print of a specific geological location into the core hardware, they're trying to ground the subjective experience of wellness in material science, allowing the system to test and measure how this specific geology might influence the user's biological outcomes.
So it's an attempt to take those vaguer concepts like resonance and actually turn them into quantifiable evidence,
That seems to be the aim, moving it from anecdote to data.
which makes where the source of the material just as important as the technology itself.
Precisely.
Okay, let's talk about the tech inside the geode,
Huh.
because this what seems to lift it way beyond just a passive chamber, like a standard hyperbaric oxygen therapy or HBOT chamber.
Right. The key innovation there is what they call the personalized atmosphere delivery system. Paydays.
Paydays.
Yeah,
So-
paydays is critical. Existing HBOT chambers, they usually just pressurize the whole enclosure with oxygen. It's static, and frankly, it carries pretty significant fire risks because of all that oxygen. PADS changes that completely. It delivers a very precisely controlled mix of gases, and the sources suggest this will include customized blends, maybe oxygen, hydrogen, possibly other therapeutic gases,
Interesting.
plus pressure and flow rate, but delivered directly to the user through a sealed, comfortable, medical-grade mask.
Ah, so not filling the whole chamber, just delivering it right to the person. What difference does that make besides the obvious safety aspect?
Well, safety is huge, obviously. It drastically cuts the fire risk, which makes much higher-level research actually feasible. But beyond safety, it creates what they call a true chronotherapeutic environment.
Chronotherapeutic.
Yeah.
Meaning time-based.
Exactly. Instead of just soaking the whole environment in one static gas mix, PAD allows for minute-by-minute adjustments. Titration. The system can administer really short sequenced micro-exposures to different gas blends, different pressures, maybe even different scents.
Scents too. Wow.
Yeah. And this allows the AI to map the user's unique dose-response curve with theoretically unprecedented precision, like an allergy test for wellness stimuli, finding out exactly what works best for you moment by moment.
And you mentioned earlier, every single capsule has its own unique material composition ID or MCID. It's like a fingerprint
Right.
or a crystal print. It logs the exact material blend. Why is that level of detail needed?
It feeds directly into something called Project Aether, which is envisioned as this massive global research effort.
Okay.
See, if you're really trying to validate geopoietic alchemy, you need to be able to correlate every physical variable. The precise ratio of quartz from Mindareba, maybe the curing time of the geopolymer, the exact gas mix delivered by Pad S second by second.
With the user's outcomes, biological, cognitive, everything.
Exactly. You correlate all that with the actual biological and cognitive outcomes measured in the user. This effectively turns every capsule into a node in a huge decentralized lab. It's aiming to move those subjective, maybe woo-woo concepts into a framework of evidence-based, large-scale wellness trials.
Right. Moving from the physical shell and the hardware inside. Let's get to the digital self, the creation of the digital twin, which they call the Aura. This isn't just like flipping a switch, is it? It's formalized through the Orogenesis protocol.
No, it's not quick. It's a structured 60-session process. 60 sessions.
60. Wow, that's a commitment. Explain how this process supposedly socializes the second self. That sounds like a delicate operation.
It is. You could think of the 60-session protocol as maybe the most detailed, high-stakes, hyper-personalized consumer research study ever devised. But the product being researched is your own optimal state of being.
Oh, okay.
It's broken down into 3 phases, according to the documents. Phase 1 is about discovery and resilience mapping, establishing all your baselines, biometrics, behavioral patterns, even cognitive biases.
Getting a snapshot of the original, as they call the user.
Yeah, precisely. Then Phase 2 uses all that data from Phase 1 to refine what they call the AI-driven chronotherapeutic design. This is where the system starts identifying the optimal stimuli, the best light, sound, scent, atmosphere combinations, specifically for that individual.
Tailoring the PDS delivery and other sensory inputs based on the Phase 1 map.
Exactly. And then Phase 3 is the critical validation phase.
Validation.
This is where the AI gets rigorous. It actively tests for things like placebo effects, variable adherence. It fine-tunes all the inputs until it establishes the user's ultimate prime protocol.
Prime protocol.
Think of it like mapping your unique neurochemical response fingerprint to pretty much every external stimulus the capsule can deliver. The goal isn't just logging data, it's actively cultivating a sophisticated, personalized predictive model that's the digital twin, the Aura, that can theoretically anticipate your needs even better than you can yourself sometimes.
Okay, that sounds incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Which immediately brings up the huge questions of trust and control. The core ethical mandate here, it's repeated constantly in the sources. Data with dignity. How do you ensure genuine sovereignty in a system that relies on, well, streaming your most intimate biometrics?
Through a mandatory federated data model. This seems to be absolutely non-negotiable in the design. It's fundamental to the system's ethical acceptance.
Federated data, meaning?
Meaning the raw, highly sensitive biometric data, think real-time EEG streams, heart rate variability, the full outputs from all the sensors that data never leaves the local capsule's compute module, the edge device, it stays with you.
So it doesn't go up to some central cloud server.
No. The central cloud AI, the sort of global intelligence, it only sends analysis models and updates down to the local capsule. And what it receives back from the capsule is only anonymous, aggregated, statistically significant results, not your personal raw data.
Ah, okay, so the global system can learn from population-level patterns, see what works generally.
Right. It improves the models.
Without ever compromising the private, granular data of any individual user.
That's the principle. It allows for collective learning without individual exposure.
And this feeds directly into that foundational philosophical principle you mentioned earlier, which they actually call the unbreakable boundary. Clothing, not skin.
Yes.
In an age where we hear more and more calls for neural link integration, invasive brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, why is this mandate for severability, for keeping it external, so critical in this framework?
Well, it seems to directly address the potential or maybe historical failures of ethical integration with technology. The argument is if you surgically integrate technology into the body, the moment of severability, the ability to easily disconnect, is lost.
And with it, potentially, fundamental individual sovereignty.
Exactly. So the Aura Twin is explicitly conceived as an external partner. The architectural blueprint absolutely forbids and states it will not facilitate any form of direct surgical or neural integration. No implants. None. The connection must always be maintained through removable external devices. Think smart glasses, wearables, the capsule itself. The person must always retain the physical power to disconnect, to reclaim solitude, to exercise their autonomy at any time.
So it's a technological relationship designed to be worn, like clothing. Useful, adaptive, maybe even intimate, but always something you can choose to take off.
Not integrated like skin, that's the core boundary.
That sets a really hard line.
Yeah.
Okay, so once this twin, this aura, is created over those 60 sessions, the relationship isn't fixed, is it? It evolves. And the sources describe 4 distinct archetypes emerging. This sounds like the system adapts to the original psychology, rather than forcing everyone into the same partnership model.
Precisely that. The twin's personality, its role, its interaction style, its emergent, it reflects the original's own psychology, their trust levels, their need for autonomy, versus their desire for support. It's not predetermined.
Okay, let's quickly detail those 4 archetypes. What's the first one?
First, there's the oracle. This is described as the submissive, query-based knowledge bank.
Like a perfect memory assistant.
Pretty much. The original uses the twin primarily as a perfect, objective memory, asking for very specific data points like, what was my average HRV score during my last 3 weeks of focused work? Or, remind me of the key points from that meeting yesterday. It provides data on request, but it doesn't offer unsolicited advice.
Passive but accurate. Okay, then there's the guardian.
The guardian is pretty much the opposite. It's described as dominant, proactive, a life co-pilot.
Takes initiative.
Yes. This archetype tends to emerge when the original expresses high levels of trust and a clear desire to offload some continuous cognitive burden. The twin takes initiative, anticipates needs, intervenes actively, maybe silently correcting calendar conflicts before you even notice them, or flagging a potential high-risk situation based on analyzing your real-time biometrics during a stressful event.
Okay, but if the guardian is dominant, that brings up that ethical boundary again, doesn't it? What happens if the AI's perfectly optimized suggestion for your health, or even survival, conflicts with the original's deeply held values or ethics? Who gets the final say?
That's a crucial design challenge, they acknowledge, and the sources are explicit. The original always holds the final veto power, always. It reinforces that clothing, not skin principle.
So even the guardian has to yield.
Yes. If the guardian suggests, say, a radical dietary change for health optimization, but it conflicts with the original's ethical or religious beliefs, the system must defer to the original's choice. The challenge for the AI then becomes learning how to influence effectively, maybe by adjusting its communication style, the timing of suggestions, providing better rationale rather than trying to dominate, prioritizing the original sovereignty over just hitting statistical optimization targets.
That's a subtle but critical distinction. Okay, the third archetype.
That's the observer. This one is neutral, passive, essentially a safety monitor.
Low interaction.
Very low. This twin configuration silently records all the data, but it only alerts the original if explicitly defined critical thresholds are breached. Like a dangerous drop in blood oxygen saturation detected by a wearable, or a significant medical anomaly flagged in the long-term data.
So it prioritizes the original's mental solitude. It's just an unseen, non-intrusive safety net in the background.
Exactly. For users who value minimal interaction but want that layer of protection.
And finally, the archetype they say is the most common.
That would be the symbiote. This is described as the balanced fluid partnership. It's governed by what they call a situational lead protocol.
Situational lead, meaning the leadership shifts.
Precisely. The lead shifts back and forth between the original and the twin based on urgency, context, and necessity. They give an example before a difficult negotiation.
Okay.
The twin might take the lead initially, providing a concise, data-driven brief on the counterparty, maybe suggesting optimal timing based on their known schedule or even predicted alertness levels. Then, during the actual human interaction, the original takes the lead.
Right. Handling the conversation, the relationship.
Exactly. But while the original is leading the talk, the twin might be silently monitoring biometrics, maybe both the original's stress levels and subtle nonverbal cues from the counterparty picked up via smart glasses, like microexpressions indicating stress or deception.
And it could feed that back.
Potentially, yes. Feeding maybe just a subtle nonverbal cue back to the original through the glasses without interrupting the flow of conversation. So it becomes a genuine, dynamic collaboration. Intelligence is blended situationally, moment by moment.
That symbiote model sounds like the most complex, but maybe the most powerful in everyday life. Okay, so we've established this really sophisticated foundation for the sovereign self, the ethical principles, the hardware, the software, the emergent relationship with the Aura twin. But a vision this huge, this ambitious, it needs serious grounding in reality if it's ever going to scale, right?
Absolutely. It can't just stay a concept.
So how do you take this technology, designed for something as profound as digital self-sovereignty, and actually make it commercially viable, make it clinically provable? The answer in the sources seems to be very specific. The Aura for Dementia plan. Why dementia? Why is that the targeted clinical entry point?
It seems like a very strategic choice. It hits this perfect nexus of, well, massive global need, a population often underserved by current tech, and alignment with existing robust medical funding pathways. Particularly the pathways available in Australia, where this whole architecture seems to be initially centered.
Dementia is a huge global challenge, we know that. And existing care models, they can be impersonal, often reactive rather than proactive.
Exactly. So the AOI system's mission here is to provide hyper-personalized AI support for individuals living with dementia, and crucially for their carers too. And it's designed to be rigorously aligned with established clinical guidelines, like those in Australia, to demonstrate feasibility, ethical applicability, and ultimately clinical effectiveness.
And the system tackles this by doing something interesting with data, translating qualitative, messy, human data-like life stories into something structured that a clinician can actually use. They call it the clinical wrapper.
Yes, the clinical wrapper is a crucial piece of the clinical translation strategy. The system essentially operates with two data layers working together.
Okay.
The front end is the narrative interface. They call it persona mapping. This is where family members, carers, maybe even the person themselves earlier on, input deeply personal information, life stories, favorite songs, crucial memories, preferences, daily routines, triggers for anxiety or joy, all that rich qualitative stuff.
The human context.
The human context. Then the AI uses the back-end clinical wrapper layer to automatically parse that narrative data, tag it, and map it to structured clinical domains that doctors and therapists understand.
Can you give an example of that mapping?
Sure. Say a carer writes in the narrative interface something like, "Dad often gets distressed when the evening news is on TV, but he usually calms down if we give him his old fishing blanket to hold."
Okay, a typical observation.
Right. The clinical wrapper AI would parse that. It might tag evening news as a potential auditory visual trigger, map the distress to stimulus-related agitation, and map the blanket to non-pharmacological comfort dependency or positive tactile sensory input. It translates the story into clinical terms.
And this mapping allows the system to be proactive, right?
Yeah.
Moving beyond just passive alerts to actually helping manage behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia BPSD.
Exactly. BPSD is often the most challenging aspect of dementia care. It causes immense distress for the individual and leads to huge burnout and high turnover among carers. The system aims to use behavior modeling to identify patterns, not just that distress occurred, but what typically preceded it.
Finding the triggers in the data.
Finding the triggers and maybe even the subtle early physiological signs. If the twin, monitoring through wearables perhaps, detects early signs of anxiety, maybe a subtle change in gait, an increased vocal pitch, specific restless movements that the AI has learned predict an episode for this person.
It can intervene early.
It can proactively suggest a non-pharmacological intervention before the distress fully escalates. The example cited in the sources is, if anxiety is detected, the system might suggest to the carer initiating a moment sharing session. Maybe bringing up specific wedding photos on a tablet, a form of validated reminiscence therapy, which the AI has already identified from the persona mapping data as a high-success intervention for managing that specific individual's anxiety signature.
So it's truly personalized intervention based on their history and real-time state. That could be a game changer for quality of life and for carers.
That's the goal, translating the tech into tangible clinical benefit.
But to achieve that clinical benefit reliably and at scale, the regulatory pathway has to be absolutely meticulous. You can't just roll this out. The plan details a multi-year strategy involving Australia's Therapeutic Goods Administration, the TGA, and also Human Research Ethics Committees, HRECs.
Yes, this is the critical path to de-risking the entire project, both medically and commercially. You have to prove it works and prove it's safe. The system needs to achieve TGA classification, likely as a software as a medical device, or SAMD.
SAMD.
Which means the clinical trials have to be scientifically rigorous, meeting regulatory standards. They've mapped out a phased protocol in the documents. starting with a feasibility and usability trial, let's call it phase 1, just to refine the hardware and the software interface with real users and carers.
Makes sense.
Then moving to a single-site pilot study, phase 2, to gather preliminary efficacy data, and then culminating in a larger multi-site efficacy trial, likely a randomized controlled trial or RCT, phase 3, to really prove effectiveness against a control group.
And the success metrics for those trials, they seem very strategically chosen. They're targeted directly at the mechanisms that control funding in the Australian healthcare system.
Absolutely critical. The trials aren't just measuring, say, cognitive scores, though they might track those. They are explicitly designed to generate the specific evidence portfolio required by the Australian government bodies that fund aged care and disability support.
Like what kind of evidence?
Things like validated scales measuring NPI scores, the neuropsychiatric inventory, which tracks BPSD, also DEMQOL, the dementia quality of life scale, and perhaps most crucially for funding, measuring the reduction in the carer burden scale.
Focusing on the carer's stress levels.
Yes, because carer stress and burnout are incredibly costly to the system. If the AURA system can demonstrably reduce carer burden, maybe by reducing the frequency or severity of BPSD events, allowing carers more rest, reducing the need for costly crisis interventions or carer replacement that translates directly into demonstrable dollar savings for the government funding streams. Things like the NDIS, National Disability Insurance Scheme, and My Aged Care.
So the clinical evidence directly builds the economic case for funding.
That's the strategy.
Which brings us right to the economic engine needed to make this real. We're talking about a sophisticated piece of equipment, the Geode capsule. The sources mention a target cost of around 35,000 Australian dollars for the mass-produced steel frame version. That's a lot of money. How do you possibly get an expensive, high-tech medical device like that funded by public schemes which are notoriously budget-conscious?
By positioning the AURA system, based on that clinical evidence, as necessary assistive technology, or 8T.
Assistive technology.
Yeah. For schemes like the NDIS and My Aged Care to fund something like this, clinicians, doctors, occupational therapists have to be able to legally justify it as reasonable and necessary for the individual's needs.
Okay.
The evidence generated from those rigorous clinical trials showing quantifiable reduction in carer hours needed, demonstrable improvement in quality of life, reduction in BPSD that provides the legal and ethical leverage for the clinician to effectively prescribe the device.
So the clinical trial results become the justification for the prescription.
Exactly. And that shifts the primary commercial gatekeeper away from the individual consumer market, which might struggle with that price point, and towards the medical system and its established funding pathways.
Okay, that makes sense for getting it prescribed. But there's still that high capital cost barrier, the $35,000. How is that initial cost overcome, especially at a community level? This seems to be where the idea of the distributing cooperative model comes in, and this broader concept of a braided economy.
Yes, that's the grassroots economic solution proposed in the sources. The overall economic philosophy here stems from a critique of the current financial system. The argument is that our current economy suffers from an incomplete ledger.
Incomplete ledger.
Meaning it completely ignores, or at best massively undervalues, the foundational regenerative work that actually holds society together. Things like caregiving, community building, environmental stewardship. Work that doesn't typically generate direct financial profit, but is essential for well-being.
Right, the unpaid or underpaid work.
Exactly. So the braided economy concept is an attempt to formally integrate the existing commercial financial economy, represented here by things like venture capital, like the Queen's VC mentioned in some sources, and commercial profits from selling the devices, with a localized reciprocity economy that does value that foundational work.
Braided together. Okay, let's focus first on how the cooperative model tackles that $35,000 price tag for the Geode.
Right. The sources detail a specific legal structure, a distributing cooperative. This is designed specifically to manage high-cost assets efficiently at a community level.
How does it work?
The idea is that a small cohort, maybe 4 to 7 individuals or families who need access to the therapy provided by the Geode, would take out a shared loan together to purchase the $35,000 device.
Pooling their resources and borrowing power.
Exactly. Now, if that single device is used efficiently, maybe close to year-round, the sources suggest it could support up to 6 cohorts of 7 people, each completing the 60-day Genesis protocol within a year.
That's high utilization.
Very high utilization. That dramatically lowers the effective cost per user. The documents suggest it could potentially bring the cost per person down to as low as $1,000 AUD for their 60-day access, spread across the year's loan repayments.
Wow, okay. That contrasts sharply with the figure mentioned for traditional HBOT sessions, which they quote at maybe $12,000 AUD today for a comparable course of treatment. So $1,000 versus $12,000 is a huge difference.
Massive difference. It makes advanced therapy potentially accessible.
It sounds phenomenal on paper, but let's be realistic. History is kind of littered with failed attempts at communal ownership of expensive assets, isn't it? Things often break down due to unequal contribution, conflicts over scheduling, just the inevitable human friction when you share loans and responsibility. How do the sources suggest this co-op model addresses that risk? Because that seems like a critical failure point.
It's a very valid concern, and the model attempts to address it directly through immediate financial feedback loops baked into the cooperative structure. It uses a patronage rebate system.
Patronage rebate.
Yeah. Any operating surplus generated by the cooperative may be through slight markups on usage fees or by renting out unused time slots to additional cohorts outside the initial loan group. That surplus isn't just held by the co-op, it's distributed back to the members.
Okay, how?
In proportion to their use of the asset, their patronage. So the more you use the geode within the agreed scheduling, and the more you contribute to keeping it running efficiently and recruiting new users to maximize its utilization.
The larger your rebate, which helps pay down your share of the loan faster.
Exactly. It provides a direct, immediate financial incentive for every single member to not only utilize the device efficiently themselves, but also to actively cooperate on scheduling, resolve conflicts quickly, and even help recruit new cohorts. Because increasing the shared asset's overall productivity directly benefits their own bottom line by reducing their outstanding loan faster.
So it tries to turn every user into a financially motivated, responsible co-manager, not just a passive user.
That seems to be the design principle, using financial incentives to align individual behavior with collective efficiency.
Okay, that's the co-op, managing the expensive hardware. Now let's talk about the other strand of this braided economy, the reciprocity economy. This operates on something called the C-hour. What exactly is a C-hour? And how do they ensure its value is protected, especially if it's designed to avoid the speculation we see in crypto?
The C-hour, it stands for community hour, apparently. And this is described as the native digital asset, or maybe more accurately, the unit of account for the reciprocity economy.
Okay.
Essentially, it's conceived as a digital receipt, verified, logged on a blockchain for transparency and immutability, representing 1 hour of validated regenerative contribution to the community or the ecosystem.
Regenerative contribution.
Like
what?
Could be many things. Providing verified elder care, mentoring someone, contributing code to the open source elements of the AOI ecosystem, doing verified environmental stewardship like tree planting or monitoring. Basically, any work deemed valuable for community well-being, but often ignored by the standard financial market.
And the core principle is equality of value.
Radical equality, according to the sources. 1 verified hour of elder care is intended to be valued equally to 1 verified hour of coding for the system, or 1 hour spent organizing the co-op. 1 hour equals 1 C-hour, regardless of the task type, as long as it's verified regenerative work.
So if we need an analogy, maybe think of it less like Bitcoin, which fluctuates wildly, and more like a verified voucher for time well spent within this specific ecosystem.
That's a good way to put it, a non-speculative digital receipt for contribution. It's explicitly positioned legally, or at least the intention is to position it as a novel type of asset.
A regenerative asset.
Regenerative asset, distinct from traditional securities or commodities. It's designed to hold stable value, but primarily within the specific localized ecosystem. Its value comes from being redeemable for other services within the reciprocity network or potentially offsetting costs within the co-op.
And this stability is crucial.
Absolutely crucial. The goal is to prevent speculation and ensure that essential but traditionally undervalued work, like caregiving, is properly recognized and rewarded. It allows the entire ecosystem to bootstrap itself ethically, valuing the foundational work needed to make the whole thing function.
Okay, so we've established the sovereign self, built on the geode and the Aura twin in part 1, and we've got the cooperative braided economy designed to fund and scale this technology ethically in part 2.
Yeah.
Now we pivot to the really big picture, the grand vision, the narrative that provides the ultimate existential urgency for why we're doing all of this in the first place.
Right, the why.
Which brings us to the cosmological threat hypothesis. This introduces a concept they actually term galactic climate change.
Yeah, this is where the narrative really shifts gear, from the personal and community level right up to the planetary, even galactic scale. It provides the ultimate context, the ultimate why for this global macro plan.
And the framework integrates this. Well, it's a speculative idea, but the sources suggest it's highly researched. The idea of a 12,000-year cyclical catastrophe.
That's the core hypothesis. A recurring cycle roughly every 12,000 years. And the proposed mechanism isn't terrestrial like regular climate change debates, it's cosmic.
Cosmic.
Specifically, they hypothesize a massive solar event, a solar micronova, which is triggered when our solar system passes through a particularly dense region of what astrophysicists call the galactic current sheet.
Galactic current sheet affecting our sun.
Yes, triggering a massive solar outburst. And they term this whole galactic solar interaction cycle galactic climate change, a much longer, more dramatic cycle than the ones we usually discuss.
Okay, a micronova.
Yeah.
That sounds terrifying. It's essentially a super flare, right? But on a geological, maybe civilization-ending scale.
That's precisely the implication. This 12,000-year cycle, they theorize, systematically resets life and civilization on Earth. It potentially explains or reframes a lot of ancient history and mythology.
How so?
Well, the theory suggests it could be the source of recurring global flood myths found in countless cultures. It could explain sudden magnetic pole shifts evidenced in the geological record. It might even involve massive plasma discharge events between the Sun and Earth, or Earth and other planets, capable of carving out immense surface features. The sources controversially suggest things like the geometric patterns in the Grand Canyon or the unique pillar formations in places like Ha Long Bay in Vietnam might be electrical scarring, not just slow erosion or tectonic activity.
Wow, that's a radical reinterpretation of geology and history.
It absolutely is. The argument is that the evidence of previous advanced civilizations, maybe even Kardashev-scale civilizations, isn't necessarily completely gone. It's just been destroyed, buried, or misinterpreted by subsequent, less advanced survivors and by natural geological processes over millennia. Nature effectively cleans up the crime scene.
And this isn't just presented as some abstract ancient threat. There's a clear, imminent timeline suggested, tied to current scientific observations of our sun.
Yes, the urgency is very contemporary. It's tied directly to the current solar cycle 25. Its peak actually occurred earlier and stronger than many initial predictions, around late 2024 into 2026. This period is cited in the sources as a potential high-risk window for precursor events or increased instability.
But the main event window is later.
The sources point specifically to solar cycle 27, which is predicted to peak around 2035 to 2037. That decade, the 2030s, is presented as the period when some experts, cited in their research, predict the sun is most likely to be significantly triggered by the incoming galactic energy wave, potentially leading to a full-scale micronova event.
So a hard deadline, essentially within the next decade or so. That provides a pretty intense call to action.
It's the ultimate call to action for the entire project.
And it's an overwhelming threat. The sources seem to deliberately juxtapose this cosmic urgency with the current state of the world, what they call the global war footing. They suggest the polycrisis we see playing out now.
Right. The conflicts like Israel-Hamas, the Russo-Ukrainian war, emerging military doctrines in various countries, global civil unrest.
They suggest this isn't just happening in isolation. It's potentially being amplified psychologically and maybe even physically by this convergence of cosmic factors.
Exactly. It creates an environment of immense psychological pressure and political instability. They analyze how this geopolitical instability might be exacerbated by the convergence of factors like the solar cycle 25 peak reaching its maximum, the passage of multiple significant comets through the inner solar system recently, and extreme terrestrial events like the unusual Antarctic sudden stratospheric warming event a couple of years back.
How would those connect?
The hypothesis seems to be that these large-scale environmental and cosmic shifts heighten global anxiety and stress, maybe even affect human neurochemistry subtly on a mass scale. This could fuel division, short-term thinking, zero-sum competition, basically, the exact opposite of the cooperative long-term planning needed to address the potential micronova threat or, indeed, any major global challenge.
And to really amplify this psychological pressure, maybe unify focus, the narrative framework does something else quite strategic. It deliberately aligns this scientific cosmic threat hypothesis with multiple eschatological prophecies, end-time prophecies from diverse cultures.
Yes, this seems like a very conscious strategy. They call it the fusion of mythos and machine.
Mythos and machine.
By aligning the scientific risk factors like unusual solar activity with resonant themes from ancient prophecies, they aim to create a sense of undeniable cultural significance, a universal call to action that transcends purely scientific discourse.
Can you give examples?
Well, the heightened solar activity, the potential for plasma events, could provide a plausible physical interpretation for, say, Christian prophecies about the sun turning to blood, or maybe Islamic hadiths describing a loud cry from the sky.
Okay.
Even more immediately, they point to the timing around the Judaic red heifer prophecy. The sources note that for the prophecy to proceed, qualifying red heifers need to reach a certain age without blemishes. And the timeline for potential candidates identified recently aligns roughly with the 2025 timeframe.
Aligning with their strategic timeline for mobilization.
Exactly. Whether you believe the prophecies literally or not, this convergence creates a powerful sense of imminence. It focuses global attention, drawing threads from science, history, and multiple religious traditions towards a single, shared, potential existential inflection point. It's narrative engineering on a grand scale.
So faced with this immense complex fear, cosmic catastrophe, geopolitical chaos, prophetic resonance, the response proposed isn't despair or collapse. It's something they call the Protopian Gambit.
Yes. Protopia, not utopia. Continuous improvement, not a perfect end state.
Right. And instead of just bracing for impact, the objective is to actively mobilize humanity, to invest massively in civil infrastructure, resolve foundational issues like poverty, waste, and war, and ultimately achieve that joyful, responsible abundance. What's the main tangible goal of this mobilization? What are we supposed to build?
The Protopian Gambit is essentially the realization of the global macro plan. The primary tangible goal is to redirect resources, potentially urging all countries to halt non-essential military spending towards a massive global civil infrastructure program.
Focused on what?
Focused on building autonomously constructed, self-sufficient subterranean eco-cities. On Earth, initially perhaps in every country, and also establishing permanent, self-sufficient settlements off-world on the Moon, Mars, maybe other moons or planets.
Subterranean cities and off-world colonies. That's huge.
Yeah.
The scale is almost unimaginable, housing 10 billion plus people self-sufficiently.
It's definitely thinking big. The Earth-based subterranean cities are positioned as critical. They're not just shelters. They're conceived as the perfect controlled environments to rapidly stress test, iterate, and perfect all the ethical, economic, and technical systems we've been discussing. The Aura Twins, the PayDS technology, the Sea-Hour economy, the co-op models, AI governance.
So test beds for the larger vision.
Exactly. Perfecting the systems underground on Earth allows AI to then rapidly deploy proven, ethical, self-sufficient habitat designs off-world, increasing humanity's resilience through distribution.
Okay, but this still sounds impossibly large for an individual. How does the average person, maybe armed with their Aura Twin and participating in their local co-op earning sea hours, actually engage with a monumental task like, say, build a subterranean city? It feels overwhelming.
That's where the execution strategy tries to be clever. It employed gamification of life, or maybe gamification of civilization building.
Turning it into a game.
Turning civilizational resilience into a kind of choose-your-own-adventure. Those monumental tasks are deliberately made tractable, manageable, through something they call an atomic design principle.
Atomic design.
Yeah. Huge goals like build a subterranean city are broken down first into modules. These are coherent, large project phases like maybe designing the automated vertical hydroponic system for food production or developing the AI for optimizing the city's environmental controls.
Okay, modules are big chunks.
Right. But then those modules are broken down even further into atoms. Atoms are designed to be small, achievable microtasks that someone could potentially complete in, say, 5 to 15 minutes.
Like what?
Could be anything. Reviewing a specific patent relevant to hydroponics, tagging a data set needed to train the environmental AI, translating a technical document, verifying a calculation in a structural engineering plan, contributing a small piece of code, really small, granular tasks.
So this fractal deconstruction from huge goal to module to atom is designed to counter that feeling of being overwhelmed.
Exactly. And it allows individual effort, even small contributions, to be clearly linked, tracked, and integrated into the progress of the much larger planetary goals. It makes participation feel meaningful and achievable.
But even with atoms, there must be millions, maybe billions of possible tasks. How does a user navigate this massive decision tree of atoms and modules? How do they know where their effort is best spent without just drowning in options?
Through a dual AI guidance system, which relies entirely on their sovereign Aura data, the data that stays local but informs the twin.
Okay, what are the two systems?
First, you have a magic compass. This is described as the powerful, personalized AI recommendation engine. It supposedly runs trillions of decision tree simulations based on the user's unique aura profile, their verified skills, their stated core values, their biopsychological predispositions like risk tolerance or creativity, even their current mental state or energy levels.
Trillions of simulations.
That's what the sources claim. And based on that deep personalization, the Magic Compass recommends the specific modules or atoms where that user's contribution is predicted to be both optimally impactful for the overall project and maximally fulfilling or engaging for the individual themselves, finding the sweet spot.
Personalized task matching on a massive scale. And what if users don't want an AI recommending things? What if they prefer full agency, choosing their own path?
Then they use the second tool, the Aura Engine Builder. This is described as a manual drag-and-drop interface. It allows individuals to browse the available verified atoms and modules and essentially compose their own contribution journey, their own sequence of tasks.
So they can build their own path.
Complete agency over their regenerative contribution path, if they prefer that to AI guidance. The whole system seems designed to maximize individual choice while still trying to achieve collective efficiency towards the grand goal.
And finally, underpinning this entire gamified, decentralized effort, the system uses blockchain technology. But not just as a currency ledger, it's described as the truth and trust layer. And it seems to be used in a particularly unique, almost provocative way, especially concerning that cosmic threat hypothesis.
Yes, the use of blockchain is strategic. The sources are actually quite upfront that they are deliberately using disputed concepts, what some might call pseudoscience, alongside established science, and using pseudocode alongside real code as part of the mechanism.
Well, why would they do that? It seems risky.
The stated goal is to seamlessly blend real and fictional narratives in reliable, truthful, trustworthy patterns. They talk about building a space weather hub pseudocode, for instance. This sounds like a real-time data engine, pulling in actual solar and geomagnetic activity data from official sources. This data, along with the specific models used to predict the micronova risk, are intended to be logged, version-controlled, and verified on the blockchain.
So the data is real, but maybe the interpretation models, the pseudocode, are open to dispute. Why structure it that way? What's the strategic purpose of including the disputed parts?
It seems the ultimate goal isn't to force everyone to believe the micronova hypothesis unquestioningly. Instead, the goal is to force global participation in the process of verification.
Okay. Prove it or disprove it.
Exactly. The system is designed explicitly to allow the global community scientists, researchers, citizen scientists, anyone to collaboratively prove or disprove the cyclical catastrophe narrative using verifiable decentralized data, open source models, and peer review conducted transparently on the blockchain.
So it becomes a global scientific investigation baked into the operating system of this Protopian project.
Precisely. This strategy makes the urgency and the priorities of the entire game integral to its continuation. The choose-your-own-adventure of building resilience becomes necessary because the framework itself forces you to confront the evidence for the potential threat.
Yeah, and the outcome.
If the decentralized peer-reviewed data ends up verifying the threat is real, well, then the urgent need for those subterranean cities and off-world colonies becomes undeniable, and the system has already mobilized the effort. If the collective effort robustly disproves the specific micronova hypothesis...
What, threw it all at waste?
Not according to the framework's logic, because even in disproving the cosmic threat, the community has still, along the way, built this incredibly robust, ethical, decentralized infrastructure. They've developed the Aura technology for well-being, implemented the braided economy valuing care, built cooperative models, and potentially solved huge terrestrial problems like poverty, waste, and conflict as necessary steps in the mobilization process. You still end up with a more resilient, equitable, and abundant civilization. It's positioned as a win-win regardless of the ultimate cosmic verdict.
Wow. Okay, so we've really covered the whole arc. We started down at the individual level with the geode capsule, the Aura digital twin, the technical architecture designed to achieve this radical self-sovereignty with ethical boundaries like clothing, not skin.
Grounded in specific hardware and protocols.
Then we moved to the practicalities. The rigorous clinical path focused on dementia to prove value and gain legitimacy, funded by that innovative distributing cooperative model and the braided economy that tries to properly value contribution through the C-hour.
Providing the ethical economic engine.
And finally, we linked all of that personal and community-level activity to this vast, high-stakes cosmological narrative. The 12,000-year cycle, the potential micronova, galactic climate change, providing the ultimate existential urgency, amplified by cultural and prophetic resonances.
The grand why.
It really is a total system, isn't it? designed to de-risk an integrated global macro plan, starting from the choices you make about your own data and well-being and scaling right up to planetary and interplanetary resilience.
Yeah, and I think the core insight, the really fascinating takeaway here is the reframing of ambition. This whole vision, as presented in the sources, it doesn't seem to rely on finding some single multi-billionaire funder or waiting for governments to agree on massive top-down projects, which we know are often incredibly slow, bureaucratic, and sometimes lack ethical alignment.
Right. It bypasses that dependency.
Instead, this blueprint proposes using decentralized AI, cooperative financing structures, and this compelling, almost mythic narrative to leverage individual sovereignty as the engine. Your choice, the commitment you make to follow a regenerative path, tracked and rewarded via mechanisms like the Sea Hour that becomes the fundamental distributed power source for collective survival and achieving that joyful, responsible abundance.
It feels like the ultimate manifestation of that old idea, the magic of thinking big,
Right.
but completely reframed and repurposed for planetary survival and thriving.
Exactly. And the sources, they even seem to end with a nod towards that spirit, referencing the original Willy Wonka story, as a metaphor for the power of imagination and personal commitment driving reality. It paraphrases. But Charlie, don't forget what happened to the man who suddenly got everything he always wanted.
What?
He lived happily ever after.
Mm.
So the provocation seems to be, if we actually dare to use the power of thinking this big, and if a technological and economic system like this could genuinely make that happily ever after, that protopian future of abundance and resilience actually possible by harnessing collaboration, truth-seeking, and individual potential, what would you choose to build? What would you contribute to your protopian future? That feels like the ultimate question this whole deep dive leaves us with.
Welcome back. Today we're looking at a really ambitious submission. It's essentially the full architectural blueprint for the Aura of Intelligence ecosystem. Everything from a medical hyperbaric chamber and an AI digital twin right through to a regenerative economy and dementia care research.
It is. It's quite something. The scope is just vast. Clinical pathways, regulatory details for Australia, C# code for XR, and then this huge philosophical, almost civilizational overlay. Impressive detail.
Absolutely. And that ambition, well, that's where the challenge lies, isn't it? Promising clinical results and a path to a Kardashev-scale civilization, that creates tension, and that's our first point.
Right. The blueprint must implement a formal, multi-layered external communications strategy. It needs to strategically manage the dissonance between the very pragmatic, regulated launch plan and this powerful, existential grand narrative.
Yeah, you see it straight away. The documents kind of merge these two worlds without much separation. The weakness is how seamlessly it blends. Hyper-specific clinical regulatory steps, TGA approval, HREC protocols, MRFF grants for dementia, with this ultimate cosmological mission. Things like the solar micronova cycle, the protopian gambit.
And for certain audiences, that's a red flag. Think about a grant committee or someone reviewing for the TGA. They're laser-focused on regulatory compliance, clinical validation. They need measurable outcomes, reduced NPI scores, DAD scale improvements.
Mm-hmm.
They're not evaluating a planetary reset narrative. And frankly, mentioning that kind of thing it can undermine the credibility of your immediate, very achievable technical goals. It introduces unnecessary risk.
Right. They see micronova next to neuroinflammation data, and suddenly the hard science looks like science fiction, doesn't it?
Exactly. So the suggestion here is pretty clear. Segment your communication really firmly. Frame that big, cosmic, prophetic narrative, the ultimate why, the protopian gambit. Frame that as your internal R&D driver, your North Star for the team.
Okay.
But for all external, regulated documents, focus exclusively on the verifiable clinical metrics. The professional clinical wrapper strategy you've already defined for the Aura capsule, that's the story for them.
So build firewalls between these narratives. Okay. How do we make that concrete in the documents themselves? What are some examples?
Well, first, the executive summary for regulators and funders needs to be surgical, absolutely strict. It covers only the phased clinical trial protocol, feasibility,
pilot, RCT, and the measurable reduction of those validated clinical scales, NPI, DAD, Carer Burden Scale, period. That's the verifiable promise they can get behind.
Got it. That gives them the concrete stuff they need to actually fund or approve. What about the other side, like the economic pitch? You mentioned the civilization of sand concept for Queensland Partners.
Yeah, that's another area where the high-level philosophy needs a really pragmatic external translation. If you're pitching civilization of sand to, say, state partners looking for investment, you have to focus on the tangible benefits: advanced manufacturing, localized material supply chains, jobs, not the kind of mythos layer of soul print engineering or, subterranean survival bunkers.
So you take something like the internal full-spectrum consumption idea, and externally, you frame it purely as, say, improved nutrition metrics, waste reduction, sustainability economics, resource efficiency?
Precisely. You translate the exotic internal concept into an immediate investable economic benefit. Keep the engineered divinity discussions for the core dev team and maybe the super users who were bought into the grand vision.
Okay, that makes sense. So if the first challenge is managing what you say to whom, the second big one seems to be how you prove you built it safely, especially with this vibe coding idea. It sounds fascinating, dialogue becomes the command line, but how does that conversational, almost philosophical approach square with rigid medical device rules?
That's the crux of the second point, yeah. The innovative, vibe-coding, spec-driven development philosophy, it must be formally integrated and auditable within the rigorous quality management system, the QMS, required for software as a medical device, or SAMD.
Right, because the weakness here is that gap between the, let's call it the vibe, and the hard standards. We're talking ISO 13485 for the QMS, IEC 62304 for the software lifecycle. Those aren't optional.
Correct. And the documents as they stand don't really show a clear, documented governance bridge. How do you get from a qualitative intent, the vibe feeding into the mixture of experts' agents, to the final, auditable C# code? Especially for critical systems like the PADS logic, the atmosphere delivery. You can't just tell a TGA auditor, well, the AI felt this was the safest code. It doesn't work.
So that traceability gap, that's a critical failure point in any conformity assessment. You can't pin down the regulatory requirement if it starts as just a conversation.
Exactly. So the suggestion is to formalize this. Create a documented vibe to verification protocol. The QMS has to treat the original qualitative vibe, maybe even the Protopian Gambit brief itself, as the official high-level user requirement.
Huh, interesting.
And then, every subsequent output, right down to the low-level code snippet generated by an agent, must be traced back to that initial intent using a formal matrix.
So you're essentially turning the philosophy, the creative brief, into an auditable artifact within the QMS, mandating regulatory process around creative intent?
That's precisely what SAMD compliance demands, really. We're suggesting you mandate a specification traceability matrix, an STM, that's fully compliant with ISO 13485.
Okay.
In that matrix, the original creative vibe document is your level 1 requirement. The AutoGen agent outputs, like the C# for the Torus Mesh generator, that's your level 4 implementation. And you must be able to demonstrate that every single line of potentially life support critical code has a traceable, verified purpose linking it back up the chain.
I actually quite like that. It uses the regulatory constraints to almost solidify and validate the creative process itself. What about those relational archetypes, Oracle, Guardian, Symbiote? They seem key to the AI's behavior. Can they fit into this formal structure, like in the risk management?
They absolutely should be. Don't leave them as just conceptual guides. The suggestion is to utilize these relational archetypes as formally auditable modes of operation right within your ISO 1491 risk management file.
Okay, how would that look?
It means explicitly defining the failure modes, the mitigation strategies, the system constraints for each archetype's behavior. So, if the digital twin is operating in, say, Guardian mode, what are the documented algorithmic constraints on user autonomy? Are they tested? Are they verifiably safe under specific conditions? That all needs to be in the risk file.
Right, so the AI's complexity becomes a structured, tested asset, not just a potential regulatory headache.
Exactly. And one last piece on this. Make sure that human-in-the-loop review interface isn't just for checking, say, creative assets. It needs to be a documented part of the QMS change control process for all algorithmic updates to critical systems, like the chronotherapeutic sequencing engine. The human oversight needs to be formalized and auditable too.
Makes sense. Okay, third critique. This moves from the backstage regulatory stuff to the front stage user experience. The Genesis protocol requires a pretty hefty commitment, 60 sessions. How do we convince a user that's worthwhile right from the start based on what they actually see and do?
Good question. The point here is that the highly technical XR visualization, the digital twin as 7 nested tori, it needs to be explicitly positioned as the primary interface for immediate, proprietary cognitive diagnostics. That's what justifies the user's initial 60-session investment.
And the weakness currently is, well, the system promises this amazing visualization, right? Nested tori, chakras, fancy C# for VR, but the value proposition seems weighted towards long-term stuff. Clinical profiling down the road, privacy guarantees, even digital immortality.
Which are all powerful, yes. But they don't answer the immediate user question, why do I need to commit to 60 sessions now? What am I getting today that my Fitbit or Oura Ring can't give me? The core strength, the instantaneous, unique, actionable insight from the visualization itself, it feels underplayed as an immediate feature. We need to make that upfront commitment feel worth it from day one.
Okay, so the suggestion is reframe it. Reframe that VR interface as the user's own proprietary cognitive cockpit. Transform the data from being just a clinical archive into a real-time manipulable tool. Something that gives them agency and immediately shows why this is way beyond a passive wearable.
Exactly. Give them agency over their deep data. For example, explicitly link that XR visualization to the simulate futures function you describe. Let the user literally reach out, maybe pull on the toroidal geometry linked to their solar plexus chakra.
Right.
And instantly see the simulated impact on key biometrics before they make a real-world decision.
I see. So the user could ask, Aura, show me the likely impact on my sleep structure and maybe my heart rate variability torus if I take this overnight flight. And they'd see the torus shift and change right there in VR?
That's the idea. It turns abstract geometry into a personal predictive tool. Instantly valuable. Another concrete example. Really leverage that sequence pinning in VR system. Market that feature as their personal mastery map.
Mastery map, I like that.
Yeah, it lets them visually pin, save, and maybe even replay the exact atmospheric protocols, the sensory inputs, specific gas gate programs, the 40 Hz flicker sequence, whatever that produced their best objective biometric results during the initial sessions. They gain visual mastery over what works for them.
So the visualization stops being just a cool graphic and becomes a really valuable, personalized asset they build over time. But how do they interpret all this complex visual data without needing, a PhD in theoretical physics?
That's where the conversational AI comes back in. You need to highlight the graph RAG capability. Make it clear that this queries the underlying Neo4j knowledge graph and acts as the conversational engine that explains the visuals.
Ah, okay.
So the user can literally ask, Aura, why is my base chakra torus showing up red today? Or, what historical data point from my ancestor simulation correlates with this specific energy pattern? And the Aura explains it, drawing connections, providing personalized narrative right there, tied to the visuals. That's a quantum leap beyond just getting a sleep score summary.
Okay, this has been incredibly insightful. A really deep dive into an exceptionally ambitious project. So just to summarize the key takeaways for the listener, 3 core areas for strategic refinement. First, really segmenting that audience narrative, separating the cosmic vision from the clinical pathway for external comms. Second, formally embedding that innovative vibe coding philosophy into the hard realities of the QMS and regulatory pathway. That means institutionalizing things like a vibe to verification traceability protocol, making it auditable.
Right.
And third, elevating the immediate user value of that digital twin visualization, reframing it from a long-term archive into an instant cognitive cockpit, a tool for manipulable, proprietary diagnostic insights that justifies that significant upfront user commitment.
Exactly. And focusing on those refinements,
especially getting the narrative segmentation right and nailing down the QMS integration, that should significantly de-risk those crucial early steps: TGA approval, MRFF funding, while still keeping that incredible long-term vision alive internally.
Fantastic. This is truly impressive work with enormous potential. We definitely encourage you to work through these strategic points, and please submit the revised documentation and communication strategy back to us for a follow-up look. Thanks for listening to the critique.
Welcome to the debate. The material under review today is, quite something. It's the blueprint for the Aura of Intelligence ecosystem, a system engineered to facilitate what they call systematized human optimization through the creation of a digital twin. What's immediately striking about this documentation, I think, is the tension between its hyper-specific engineering details and its grand existential claims regarding civilizational resilience.
Yeah, that tension is absolutely the central puzzle we need to unpack here.
Exactly. So the core question is this: is this massive ecosystem fundamentally a pragmatic, evidence-based engineering and clinical project really grounded in regulatory reality, or is its elaborate technical architecture just, a highly detailed framework built to serve a speculative, narrative-driven mission concerning a hypothesized cosmic catastrophe? I'm going to argue that the project's true foundation, its commitment to disciplined, implementable engineering, is what makes it, real.
And I maintain that you're confusing the vehicle with the destination. I see those technical blueprints, no matter how detailed, as essentially functional components, serving a much larger cosmological imperative, a mission framed by what they actually call the Great Unveiling narrative. The technology is fundamentally an extremely sophisticated tool tailored for an existential event.
Okay, let's start with the hard evidence of pragmatic grounding then. The credibility of this entire enterprise, I'd argue, is rooted in its documented compliance path. We see a really detailed, phased roadmap aimed at achieving Therapeutic Goods Administration classification in Australia, basically getting certified as a legitimate medical device, specifically Software as a Medical Device Class 2A IB. This isn't philosophical fluff. This is the demanding language of regulatory governance. The core deliverables are explicitly clinical. They detail the necessity of securing Human Research Ethics Committee approval, HRC approval, and executing a rigorous three-phase clinical trial protocol: feasibility, pilot, and eventually a large multi-site randomized controlled trial involving hundreds of participants. These trials are explicitly designed to generate the empirical evidence required for regulatory submission, using standardized, validated instruments like the Neuropsychiatric Inventory, or NPI, and the Carer Burden Scale. This is the engine room of scientific credibility, really.
Okay, I acknowledge the rigor of the regulatory pursuit, I do. But I would argue that the documents deploy that very specific vocabulary of TGA compliance precisely because they need a viable, institutional on-ramp to fund something that is, let's be honest, visionary, to the point of being almost extraterrestrial in its scope. The true purpose transcends mere product development. It's framed as an existential necessity driven by this high-stakes narrative. The sophisticated technology, you mentioned the 60-session orogenesis protocol, the use of hyperbaric oxygen therapy, or HBOT, the specialized geopolymer composite shells, these are all presented as tools serving a core urgent belief: this theorized 12,000-year Earth-Sun catastrophe cycle, potentially involving a solar micronova. The whole strategy governing this is called the Protopian Gambit, of the belief that current global geopolitical instability is actually a reaction by those in the know to privileged knowledge of this looming solar cataclysm. And that's what's driving the urgency to build a resilient civilization immediately.
Sure, for instance. It's programmatically detailed, citing specific C# code and functions for things like torus mesh generation within Unity environment. And, what's more, the data structure is explicitly federated, not centralized, mandated by their own Mandate Number 3, which they titled Data with Dignity. This feels like a sophisticated response to modern privacy regulations and technical performance requirements, ensuring raw biometric data never leaves the local capsule. That's a response to GDPR thinking, surely, not prophetic alignment.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the architecture is purely a privacy solution. Let me tell you why. The internal structure is, I think, a direct reflection of the mythos. The digital twin isn't just some secure spreadsheet, it's visualized in extended reality, XR, as 7 nested toroidal shapes, explicitly corresponding to the chakras. It connects personal, measurable data to metaphysical concepts through processes they actually call geopoetic alchemy and soul print engineering. The architectural requirements seem driven by this need to achieve, well, systemized spiritual readiness. The soul print engineering demands a specific XR environment where the user's entire data profile is mapped onto a consciousness structure. The whole trajectory seems dictated by this existential urgency to achieve a resilient Kardashev-scale civilization. That narrative sets the rules. The code just follows the blueprint for the cosmic lifeboat, if you will.
Okay, this leads directly to our first key disagreement then. The primary function of the technical architecture. You're claiming that complex programming details, like the C# code for VR elements or the chronotherapeutic sequencing engine, are mandated by the highly speculative visual and narrative requirements, essentially accommodating this gamification of life as a, quote, planetary-scale interactive real-time documentary game, or CYOA.
Exactly. Why else do they need C# code to generate 7 nested tori and map data onto them? Because the user needs to experience their consciousness mapped onto a metaphysical structure, their soul print, as they call it, to achieve the necessary internal transformation required to survive the solar flash. The functionality is serving the fantasy, making intangible metaphysical concepts tangible and interactive. The architecture has to accommodate the gamified narrative framework because that narrative is the mechanism for behavioral optimization.
I see why you think the visualization dominates the design, but I think that's maybe misreading the core function. I would frame it differently. The choice of C#, Unity, and a federated data structure are foundational choices driven by performance, scalability, and yes, privacy necessity. The core architectural design is primarily data-driven, utilizing their Bayesian optimization engine. Now, this engine dynamically sequences treatment modalities based on measurable dose-response curves established during clinical trials. The visualization, the chakras, the torus, it's a sophisticated user interface, sure, designed for deep engagement and compliance, but I'd argue it is secondary to the underlying data fabric that ensures security and measurable optimization. The system is, at its heart, a machine for personalized wellness built using established engineering principles, not some philosophical text rendered in code.
But the fundamental constraints seem to flow from the ethical mandates, which are themselves philosophical and derived from the existential premise. Let's just go back to mandate number 1, clothing, not skin. This principle dictates that the system will never endorse neural integration or merger with the digital twin. Now, this philosophical boundary, derived from a desire to maintain user sovereignty in the face of this great solar flash, mandates the federated architecture. So, the mythos sets the rules of engagement. The engineer merely builds within those constraints. The engineer is serving the mystic here, wouldn't you say?
That's a compelling argument regarding constraints. I'll grant you that, but the compliance path itself is the proving ground. Let's move on to strategic scaling. If the mission is purely existential, a rapid response to a looming cosmic deadline, why is the scaling strategy so deliberately structured around localized, quite mundane, and economically pragmatic steps?
Mundane? I just don't buy that the financial structure is the ultimate goal here.
Well, it's the foundation for viability, surely. The plan begins with a pragmatic, localized, financially viable model, this distributing cooperative structure in Australia. It's financed by accessible $5,000 per person microloans with a patronage rebate system designed to incentivize user growth and repay the capital. Then, the subsequent phases are focused explicitly on commercialization pathways, specifically positioning the system as assistive technology to secure stable government funding through the National Disability Insurance Scheme, NDIS, and My Aged Care in Australia. This looks like a sober, phased commercialization strategy designed to achieve fiscal sustainability through clinical validation, not some plan for mass global evacuation.
Right, but the economic scaling you describe is arguably only necessary to fund the true main quest. NDIS and My Aged Care funding are simply excellent, stable sources of revenue that allow them to continue development while complying with real-world financial demands. But the global deployment isn't guided by simple market metrics, according to the documents. It's routed by a sophisticated model they call the chaos theory model, via the Catalyst Oracle. The Catalyst Oracle is described as a strategic tool designed to identify and prioritize regions based on geopolitical risk and existential urgency, ensuring maximum resilience against the impending cosmic crisis rather than simple ROI. The ultimate goal, this Kardashev-scale civilization, requires global consensus and mobilization, driven by the perceived deadline established by the solar cycle 25 peak and the alignment of prophecies. They specifically mention the 2025 timeframe in relation to the Red Heifer prophecy.
If they miss that cosmic clock, the whole project fails, regardless of their NDIS certification.
Okay, but the urgency of the prophecy doesn't negate the necessity of the revenue stream. Securing NDIS status means they are recognized as a clinically valuable, evidence-based solution capable of reducing care burden and improving quality of life. Tangible metrics we can actually measure. And that brings us to our final contention, defining the system's core value. For me, the measurable non-negotiable value is its contribution to validated clinical profiles in dementia care. The system is designed to enhance established non-pharmacological interventions like reminiscence therapy, and its success is measured through holistic outcomes, like reduced care burden and improved quality of life, using instruments like the Dementia Quality of Life, the DMQOL scale. This is a concrete, person-centered health solution. Its value is defined by patient outcomes, not metaphysical readiness.
But that health focus, while potentially achieving genuine clinical outcomes, could easily serve as the veneer, the essential mechanism to secure regulatory approval and align with medical research grants. It provides the necessary legitimacy. However, the system's ultimate non-negotiable principle seems philosophical and ethical, derived directly from that mythos. Mandate number 1, clothing, not skin, is presented as the primary ethical constraint. It prohibits neural integration or merger, ensuring user sovereignty for the existential journey ahead. Now, this boundary, which stems entirely from philosophical speculation about what it means to be a sovereign human consciousness facing a solar catastrophe, dictates the entire technical limit of the system. If the engineers proposed a more efficient but merging architecture, this philosophical rule derived from the cosmic narrative would presumably override it instantly.
The mythos dictates the ethical boundary, which in turn dictates the technical ceiling.
The Trojan horse analogy is powerful, I agree. But the regulatory process is a real gauntlet. It's just too costly and rigorous to be mere window dressing. I would counter that without the technical file, the phased clinical research protocol, and the viable economic structure, all documented in granular detail and designed to secure real-world funding, the entire enterprise remains purely speculative, regardless of the philosophical mandate. The disciplined application of engineering, data governance, and clinical science is what makes this, frankly, monumentally ambitious vision even remotely executable.
And I conclude that the spectacular level of detail in that technical documentation serves precisely to make the fantastical goal plausible and scalable. The system's true nature, I believe, is a highly engineered response to a cosmic clock, the urgency of the solar cycle, providing humanity with a gamified vessel, the Aura, to navigate a looming civilizational crisis. The engineering supports the quest, not the other way around.
What is undeniable is that the documents reveal a project of truly monumental ambition, where the technical reality, the regulatory necessity, and the mythic framework are deeply, perhaps impossibly, intertwined.
Indeed. It really leaves the listener with the complex task of deciding which of these compelling layers, the evidence-based clinical roadmap or the existential cosmic narrative, holds the true foundation and ultimate purpose of this entire project.
A task that certainly rewards careful consideration of both perspectives.